In this video, I want to look at caching and discuss what caching is and how it can help you with your page load times in a WordPress website. Essentially, what you've got is frequently accessed resources are stored in a special area called a cache, and they can be retrieved more quickly, reducing the load on the server. Resources that can be cached include HTML and PHP files. Remember, WordPress is built on PHP files, images, fonts, scripts, and CSS. Those are a lot of the items causing us issues over at GTmetrix. So we have JavaScripts, we have images, minified JavaScript, HTML, CSS. Those types of things can be cached and therefore they can be speeded up. And that's the approach we're going to take. We can't go into GTmetrix and go through all of these individually and fix them ourselves unless we're actually really quite technical programmers. So we're going to use the cache to do this for us. The way most WordPress caching plugins work is to create a static version of your web page to show visitors, so that when somebody comes along, they can show quite quickly a static page that's already been constructed, and it loads a lot faster than WordPress having to try to put the page together on the fly. The fact that these caching programs create this static version to show as the live page means you can sometimes get problems. Have you ever tried to make a change to a post but you didn't see the update on the live site? Well, this is probably why. You've made the change on the post or the page, you've saved it and published it, it's in the database, but your site is still serving the cache version that was created earlier. So you don't actually see the changes you made. The simple solution to that is just clear the cache after you've made changes, and then you'll see them on the live website as well. So really a summary of caching is that it minimizes the data transfer between your server, WordPress, and your visitor's browser to give you a quicker page load. Fortunately, with WordPress, we've got plugins that can do the caching for us, and they are relatively easy to set up. The two that I want to have a quick look at in this video are Litespeed Cache, which is used only on Litespeed servers, so you need to check your host for that. If you're using the host that I recommend, then they do have Litespeed servers, so they will probably pre-install the Litespeed cache on your sites for you when you install WordPress. If you're not on a Litespeed server, then the other one, which is totally free and really comprehensive, is W3 Total Cache. So we'll have a look at that as well. Let's start off by having a look at the Litespeed cache. And if I bring up my demo site, I'm in the plugin section. You can see that the Litespeed cache is installed, but it's not activated. The reason it's installed is that my web host installs this automatically because they use Litespeed servers. If you're using Litespeed servers, if you're using the web host that I recommend, then you will probably have Litespeed cache installed as well and activated. I just deactivated it so we could do the optimization examples earlier in this course, but I am going to reactivate it. Before I do though, I want to go over and I want to take one of the pages on the site. I'm going to take one of the ones that was slower loading, and the slower loading one was the resized images. So let's go across to grab that URL. Let me just drag this down so you can see the URLs. That was the URL, if you remember, that gave us a 1.15 megabyte file size because WordPress wasn't compressing those images. Let's go to GTmetrix and we're going to just do a run right now of that page. Here are the results for this page. We have a B and an A for those two scores, 1.4 seconds, file size 1.15 megabytes. I would suggest that you probably run your tests 2 or 3 times and see what the page load speed is, because that will vary depending on how your server is doing at that moment in time. We've got a red there about optimizing images. I've screenshotted this set of results, and what I want to do now is go over and I'm going to activate the Litespeed cache. And this is just with the default settings. When the Litespeed cache is activated, you can see we have a Litespeed cache item over in the menu and it is enabled. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to just refresh the page so that I'm sure a cache version has been created, and then I'm going to go back and retest. And here are those results. In fact, if you check the results in this page speed list here, they are the same as they were before the cache was introduced. However, we've got a page load speed of less than a second now. Page size is the same, because remember how a cache works. A cache will put the most used resources into a cache and then load them from the cache rather than from your web server going through WordPress and the time that takes. So you're saving time. Even though the page is the same size, you're saving time on the load time because of the caching of the resources. As I said, you should retest this a few times because this will vary. It's gone from 1.5 seconds down to just under a second. And is that significant, or is that just a case of the server was a little bit less busy when I did it the second time? And that's why really you need to do 3 or 4 tests without the cache, then 3 or 4 tests with the cache, and take some kind of average. There we are, we're back down still around about 1 second. What you'll typically find is that by enabling a cache, you will get faster load times. You won't see a reduction in page size, and you may not see a change in all of this, but your page is loading faster, and that's what we ideally want. Let's go back into the dashboard, and we'll have a look at the Litespeed cache settings. There's 4 tabs here: General, Cache, Purge, and Excludes. This is the basic settings, and as it stands, you can leave everything as the default. You don't have to change anything. We've got default options selected. In most cases, the caches are all turned on, and you can purge your caches. It tells you which bits will auto purge down here, a few details there, and you can also exclude pages from the cache. So if you have a script like a forum script that doesn't work very well with a cache, then you can exclude the forum pages by including that information here. So for example, let's say your forum was contained within a folder called forum. What you could do is say forum /forum/, and this is in the do not cache URLs. And then whenever a page is being loaded, it will check to see if that string is found in the URL, and if it is, then it would be excluded from the cache. So you can actually remove the cache from certain sections of your pages, or certain sections of your website. If you scroll further down this page, you can also exclude certain categories or tags from the caching as well, and you can also exclude cookies if you want to do that. Now, my advice if you're starting out and you've never used a caching program before is just accept the defaults that are created when the plugin is installed and activated, and use those. And then as you become more and more familiar with little bits and you want to try and fix things, then go in and try and change these settings. The settings here are the basic settings. They're for people who don't really know too much about the cache and how to use it. If you want advanced options, you can click the button over here, and that will give you more tabs to play with. You've still got the general, cache, purge, and excludes, but we've got a number of other tabs here as well. The tab you'll probably find most interesting is the Optimize tab. Now, I should specify here that if you are going to start playing around with caching plugins, you may break your site. So it's always a good idea to do a backup, although any changes that you make to the cache can easily be reversed just by deactivating the plugin. But I always recommend that you take a backup before you start messing around. What you'll see here is you've got titles that match up quite well with some of the titles on GTmetrix. So Minify CSS. Minify CSS. CSS combine. This is when it will combine several CSS files into a single one. JS Minify. Again, look, we've got Minify JavaScript. So all of these things can be taken care of. In my particular case, I've actually done pretty well on those anyway. But let's go back to the cache, and let's say I'm going to Minify CSS, combine the CSS. This one I'm not too sure what that is about. JS Minify we want to do. I want to combine the JavaScripts into a single one. HTML Minify is over here as well. Minify HTML. We've got a 99%. And essentially what I would do is if you've got 100% or maybe even 99%, then don't bother reactivating this because of the problems it could cause. At the end of the day, once you've made your changes though, then test your site, make sure it's all still working. For this demo, I'm going to Minify HTML, I'm going to Minify inline CSS and inline JavaScript. And you remember that one of my pages had problems with Google Fonts loading. This will load your Google Fonts in a different way, which is better for the page load speed. This one generate, these ones are already on, they were on by default, so we'll leave those as on. Keep going down. And again, you don't really need to understand all of these, or you can go and look them up on the help file, load.js deferred, so loading JavaScript deferred. You can read the instructions here. Doing so can help reduce resource contention, improve performance. Let's enable it, see what happens. And then save changes. And then those optimizations will be written into your cache. Let me just refresh that page, make sure there's a cache version available. And I'm going to go back and retest it. And we've got some results back here. We've still got a warning here, optimize images. We know about those images. This page that we're loading has large sizes, and that would be one of the things that I would go in and optimize. And we've got still defer parsing of JavaScript, which if we look in the cache, it actually is selected as on, so we've done everything that we can do about that. But what you will notice is we're now down to just over half a second load time, and if I bring in the original one before the cache was active, we had a B score 89%, A score 90%. We're now up to A, and the page is loading faster, so that's a good start. And it's then a case of going over to the site, testing it, checking, making sure that everything works properly, and if it does, then you can settle on those settings for the plugin. I'm going to retest it one more time just to make sure that these results are consistent. And this is loaded again, and we've got 0.6 seconds again. So let's go back and have a look at the plugin settings, because we do have some other tabs across the top. One that you might like to look at is the tuning, especially if you're using Google Fonts, because I know there is a setting in there. You'll notice that you'll get little warnings. It says here, only set to on when changing the order of combined and uncombined CSS is needed. Well, we don't need to do that. CSS excludes, we can exclude some CSS files from being minified and combined. Combined JavaScript priority. Again, it says only set to on when changing the order of combined and uncombined JavaScript when you need to do that. You can exclude JavaScripts from that if there's one that's causing problems. And let's just keep going down here. We've got load Google Fonts asynchronously. So let's select that as on. You can see the little instructions here. It says use web font loader line. Before we install W3 Total Cache, we need to remove the Litespeed cache. Now, whenever I deactivate and remove a cache, the first thing I do before I deactivate and remove it is to purge the cache. Most of these caching plugins have a little icon up here in the admin bar, and this is the one for Litespeed cache. I can go down and purge all. That will only take a few seconds, and we get the message here, purge all caches successfully. So I can now go in and deactivate the Litespeed cache. I'm not going to delete it because I'm going to re-enable it afterwards. What I will do though is go and install W3 Total Cache. Now I should point out that W3 Total Cache comes with a free version. They try to get you to upgrade to the pro version. I'm only going to show you the basics of installing the free version, and that should be enough to speed up the site. Before we activate the plugin, it's worthwhile going over and running your URL through GTmetrix so we can get a baseline score. And this is the baseline score for this page. It's a 2-second load, and we have a few problems there. The most noticeable problem, obviously, is the load time of 2 seconds. So let's go and activate the plugin, and we're going to test it immediately after activating. So back on GTmetrix, I'm going to click the Analyze button and get it to analyze it once. I'm actually going to throw these results away because what's happening is as it goes and collects that web page from the website, it's also creating a cache version that I can use when I run the software, when I can run GTmetrix again. So this was the first run results. The page speed score remains at B89. The Y-slow score has increased to 95 as an A, but the load time is still 1.8. So I'll run it one more time to make sure that everything has been cached and it's now being read properly from the cache created by W3 Total Cache. And the results back here again are better now. We've got the same page speed and Y-slow. The A, 95%, is up from the pre-cache condition, but the page load time is down to 0.9 seconds. That is just with the default settings for the W3 Total Cache. To get to the options, we look for the performance menu over here on the left. And you'll see there's a plug at the top, unlock more speed, upgrade now. That's the paid upgrade if you're interested. We're just using the free version here. And to get into the main settings, we're going to go to General Settings. This screen shows the main general settings. We can go in and tweak these on other pages, but on this screen we're going to activate a few of the caches. What you have got available is a preview mode, and if you enable that, then you can make changes and test without actually deploying those changes to the site. If you deploy them to the site, this remains active until you disable it. So if you do use it, then make sure you disable it when you've finished. I'm going to ignore that and show you the settings that I want you to test. The first one, make sure page cache is enabled and just accept whatever is the default in this box here. For me, disk enhanced. Minify. Now, minification can cause problems. It's basically reducing sizes of files. And when you enable minify, you may get a warning saying, look, this is a bit dangerous. We recommend you try the CSS first, and then if that works, the JavaScript. Well, on this screen, you don't really have the option of doing just CSS without the JavaScript. We can change that, and I'll show you how shortly. But for now, I'm going to click Enable and click on the Auto. If you click on Manual, you then can choose the type of process that you want for each item. Let's keep scrolling down to Database Cache. I'm going to enable it. And then Object Cache, I'm enabling that as well. And then the browser cache I'm going to enable. The rest of it on this page we're going to leave as it is. And let's save settings and purge cache. And then the next step for me would be to go over and run the GTmetrix. Again, I might run it twice, just the first time to make sure the cache has been created, the second time to get an accurate reading of what the page load time is actually like. And here we have a page load time of 0.9. That's the same as it was before. I'm going to retest it. And here we are down closer to what we got with the Litespeed cache, 0.6 seconds. That is pretty much what I recommend you do to use W3 Total Cache. I don't recommend you go in and start making changes unless, of course, you're having a problem with your site. Your site's not loading properly or some feature of your site is not working properly since you installed the cache. In that case, what I would recommend you do is go into the General Settings page and one by one deactivate one of the caches. If you find that disabling one means your website works properly, then either leave it disabled permanently or enable it. Let's take this minify option and go into the minify settings and then have a look and see what you can switch on or off that might be causing the problem. When you enabled minify, you probably got that warning saying that to try CSS first, and then if that worked, try JavaScript. Well, on this screen, you can actually disable the JavaScript while you're keeping the CSS enabled. So you can fine tune the options over on these sections down here. But for now, what we've done is set up a default settings for W3 Total Cache, and it has had a great effect on page load speeds, which is the whole purpose of installing the cache in the first place. When we looked at the Litespeed cache, I showed you how you could exclude sections of your website from being cached. You can do the same with W3 Total Cache, so I'll just show you how to do that before we finish this lecture. What you want to do is go over to the page cache, and then you can scroll down or just click on this advanced link at the top, and this will give you options here to stop the cache working in certain areas of your site. So never cache pages, these ones here. You can insert pages you don't want cached in that text block, just one per line. What I would recommend you do there is load up this FAQ, frequently asked questions, because it will tell you how to use it. So for example, do not cache the page directory and subpages. You would include that code there. So in the example we used for the Litespeed cache, where you might have all of your forum posts inside a folder called forum, you could actually put forum there, and then that page itself, the forum homepage, and also the subpages won't be cached by W3 Total Cache. You can also remove categories. Just enter the category slug to stop categories on your site from being cached, and similarly tags on your site. You can also do the same with authors, and you have a number of other options there which I'll leave you to explore. So that's the W3 Total Cache. As I said at the beginning of this caching introduction, if you're using a Litespeed server, then use the Litespeed cache because it was built for it. If you're not using a Litespeed server, then W3 Total Cache is a great free option. In this video, I want to show you a plugin that you may not be aware of, but might be useful for switching certain things on or off on your website that are loaded by default. And to show you an example, here's this page of mine. If I run it through the GTmetrix without any caching programs installed, and I come over onto the CSS, we can have a look down here. We have this one here. This is WP includes CSS. It says block library. That block library is CSS for Gutenberg. If I scroll down a little bit further, we've got the CSS for Contact Form 7 being included, and that's on this page. There is no Contact Form 7. And also, what happens if I don't use Gutenberg? Let me go over to the plugins and show you. I've actually got the Classic Editor installed. So if I add a new post, I'm using the Classic Editor. I'm not using Gutenberg. And yet, you can see that the block library is still being loaded. That's where this plugin can come in handy. If we go across to Add New, and we're going to do a search for Asset Manager. And you're looking for this one here, WordPress Asset Manager. You can see it's by Webcraftic. Another plugin that does almost the same thing by the same company as this one, Clearify, WordPress optimization plugin. So have a look at both of those. I'm going to install the WordPress Asset Manager just to show you what it does. Here we have it installed, and the settings are over in the settings menu on the left. Click on Assets Manager and we're taken into the main screen. Now this is a free version, but there are paid add-ons for it. So if you want to upgrade it and get the full feature list, then you're paying for the plugin. Those paid options you can see down on these More Features screen down here. This button at the bottom, Get the Ultimate Plugin 100% free, basically takes you to the Clearify web page where you can download the Clearify plugin. But in terms of asset management, it does the same thing as this Assets Manager does. So we're going to leave all the settings on the main page, as they are. And what you'll see though, up in the admin bar, you'll see a script manager link. And what we can do is we can go to a web page on our website, and let me just refresh that so that the script manager appears in the admin bar. And then I can click on the admin bar script manager link, and it takes me to the settings. And those settings are for this specific page that we were looking at. One of the things you'll find is that some of these are pro only. So contact form 7 is loaded for this page, even though there's no contact form 7. And if I had the pro version, I could disable it on this page so it wouldn't have to load. This next option that we have here, we can individually turn off the resources, and that is useful. That is the JavaScript for contact form 7, which isn't on the page, so I can say, no, I don't want that resource loaded. And you can apply that to the current URL, the one you're editing, or you can apply it everywhere. And you have got some options there to exclude it from some of these pages down here. But to get the most out of it, again, you would need the Pro. If you wanted to say only have it on the contact form web page, then that is what you would need. But even so, we can turn it off everywhere. Let's say except the pages, because I know my contact form is a page. And then the CSS for the contact forms, again, we can turn that off on the current URL or everywhere, and I'll just exclude the pages. Of course, doing this way, then all of the pages that I have, whether they have a contact form 7 on them or not, are all going to include the CSS for contact form 7s and the JavaScripts for contact form 7s. There is a better way of doing this, so I'm not going to save that. Let's just reset those. If we go to the contact form, here we are, and then script manager, let's load resource, no, everywhere except the current URL. So it's not going to load it anywhere except the current URL, which is the contact form. And then we can repeat that there. Let's save those options, and we'll go back to GTmetrix and retest. And once it's done, click onto the waterfall, over onto CSS, and you can see now that on that particular page, the contact form JavaScript or CSS is missing, and the JavaScript will also be missing for that contact form plugin. Just make it absolutely sure. Yep, there we go. If we go over to the contact page, let's find that. Here we are. I'm going to copy that URL and go back to GTmetrix. And then what we'll do is we'll run GTmetrix on the contact page, and what we should find is that the contact page will have the contact form JavaScript and CSS included in the page. So what we would have selectively done is remove certain JavaScripts and CSS from certain pages, which will speed up those pages when they're loading. So here we are with the results. Let's go over to the waterfall, and I want CSS and JavaScript. Well, let's just do CSS first. Let's have a look down these. There's contact form 7 CSS. Okay, and if I switch over to the JavaScript, we should find the contact form 7 JavaScript there as well. There we are, contact form JavaScript. So this plugin has allowed me to switch them off on certain pages. But what about that Gutenberg block editor? Over on the miscellaneous here, we can have a look at some of the JavaScripts that are being loaded, and we can selectively turn those on and off as well. If I scroll to the bottom, look, WP block library. Now, I'm not using Gutenberg on the site, therefore I don't need that code being enabled. So I can switch it off permanently, and that will exclude it from all pages on the website. And I can see if there's any of these other ones that I need to switch off as well. Let me save that, and we'll head back over to GTmetrix. This is the contact form page, but as you can see here, it is using the block library CSS. We've just changed that, and we've saved the changes in here. So let's rerun the test and see whether that Gutenberg block editor code is then removed from the pages. And here is the results. Let's go over to the waterfall, look at the CSS. and that is Google Fonts, that is Font Awesome, that is the Contact Form 7, this is the Contact Form page, that is Theme, and that is Theme. Let's go and run one of the other pages on the site. Going to just paste that in. And what we should find on here is that there is no Gutenberg code and there is no Contact Form code. There's the page loaded. Let's go to the waterfall and look at the CSS. And that's Google Fonts, that is Font Awesome, that is the Customizer theme, and that is Customizer theme. So we've removed Gutenberg code and we've removed the Contact Form 7 code from there. And that is done using this Asset Manager plugin. There is one more section of features here, options, and that relates to the theme that you're using on your website. And here you can see the JavaScript marked as JS and the CSS that is loaded on all the pages on my website. Maybe I don't need them all, and I can show you that as an example. This particular theme adds in placeholders when I'm logged in as the admin. Over in the Asset Manager screen, I can see that there is a JavaScript for front placeholders and also a CSS for front placeholders. So my first guess would be that those two things are controlling that. Together they are 5 and 0.9, so 6 kilobytes in size. I could disable those on the current URL or all URLs, and hopefully that would remove them, but it would certainly remove this overhead, about 6 kilobytes. Some of these other ones are much bigger CSS files and JavaScripts, so they're probably much more important, and I wouldn't want to disable those. So that's the Asset Manager plugin. It's great, even the free version, if you want to do a little bit of tweaking just to remove a few things that might be slowing some of the pages on your website down. Just before I close in this video, there's one thing I want to bring up that I mentioned at the start of this video, and that was that if you are doing these analysis without any caching plugins installed. Why did I say that? Well, as you know, with the caching plugins, whether you've installed Litespeed or W3 Total Cache, these plugins can combine CSS and combine JavaScripts into single files. And therefore, if you run a page through GTmetrix that has been cached, then what you'll find on the CSS screen, look, we've got a single CSS file there which combines all the other CSS files. Therefore, we wouldn't notice that the Gutenberg blocks are there because it's been combined. And similarly with the JavaScripts, we've got JavaScripts combined into a single JavaScript, so we wouldn't be able to find JavaScripts in this list individually. We just have a single JavaScript. So that's why you need to disable your caching plugin before you start playing around with the Asset Manager. Once you've fine-tuned the Asset Manager and things are removed from pages, then by all means re-enable your caching plugin and get those speed benefits back.